Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast, a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have slipped under the radar and passed most people by. I am your host, Derek McDuff, and I'm joined today by a special guest, author and film historian, John DeLeo. How's this going, John?
Hey, Derek, nice to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you on. You have written 8 books, and I just got through your most recent one, which is not even nominated. A really interesting book. We're going to be talking about one of the films mentioned in that, Coal Miner's Daughter, I should say, which is, of course, following the story of Loretta Lynn, based on her biography, starring Sissy Spacek and Tommy Lee Jones, of course. Sissy Spacek won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Tommy Lee Jones, though, not even nominated, as your book talks about. Before we get into the movie, what did you want to let the people know about yourself and about your new book?
Well, as you said, number 8, and I wanted to do an Oscars book, but there had been so many, and I thought, well, if I do one, I have to come up with a fresh spin on it. And I noticed that I actually had been struck through the years of those particular instances when someone in a movie wins an Oscar and there's someone else in that movie right next to that person who is as good or sometimes better. And that person not only doesn't win, that person is not even nominated. And as I thought about it, I realized there were enough examples that I could get excited enough about to make a book out of it. And as you said, Tommy Lee Jones in this movie is a clear example to me. Even though she is spectacular in the movie and certainly deserved an Oscar, so much of the success of the film is the relationship between those two and the challenges it faces, but that there's this core between them that cannot be broken. And he's the other half of that. And so that's why he's in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some other ones that you mentioned in the book?
Well, it starts with the first Oscar ceremony. My first person in the book is Charles Farrell in the silent romance Seventh Heaven, for which Janet Gaynor became the first Best Actress winner, winning for 3 films, and that was one of them. And the most recent one is Tom Hanks in Bridge of Spies, because Mark Rylance won as Best Supporting Actor, but Hanks was overlooked as Best Actor, and I thought it was one of his best performances in an underrated Steven Spielberg movie. But then it spread fairly evenly through the decades. Among my favorites is Gene Simmons and Elmer Gantry, probably her greatest screen performance. Burt Lancaster deservedly won the performance for his, again, sort of dazzling showmanship in the title role. But she's got a much more complex and demanding role, and she's quite extraordinary and inexplicably wasn't in the top 5, particularly in a year when Elizabeth Taylor won for Butterfield 8, which is not exactly one of the most shining examples. Not that she isn't good in it, it's just that the movie's kind of junky to get that kind of acclaim. And here's one of these phenomenal Gene Simmons performances that somehow was overlooked in a movie that got a lot of Oscar love. And that's often very interesting when it's a movie that seems to be nominated in every category but the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those movies where Coal Miner's Daughter, that did get a lot of Oscar love. You know, it got, I
Yes.
think, 7 nominations, including, I want to say, Best Picture. And in,
Yeah.
in addition to the one that Spacek won, it got nominated for a bunch of stuff. And, it was a pretty well-regarded film, both financially and critically. And I did have a little bit of trouble kind of going through the book, finding a movie that was underrated that had some Oscar love. There was definitely some contenders, but I really wanted to talk about this one because while I said it was definitely really beloved in the time, people still like it a lot. I think its stars wane maybe a little bit, and it's not as well known, well loved by people other than big movie people like yourself and myself.
Mhm.
Some people might not have even heard of it, and so I wanted to kind of bring this one back into the fold. And I think maybe part of that is just because of how formulaic and just kind of repetitive all these music biopics have gotten. But I did not
Yeah.
find that to be the case with this movie at all.
Yeah.
What are your overall general thoughts on the film?
Well, like you said, we've been, I guess, in the 21st century, there's been a steady, uh, so it's just so many of these musical biopics, one after the other, and it seems like everyone gets one. But this is Coal Miner's Daughter is still one of the best, and it's not like it was new. exciting genre in 1980, doing these since the 30s, 40s. The 50s was a particular heyday for the musical biography because that was the first time they started doing sort of down and dirty ones, where the ones of the 30s and 40s, like Yankee Doodle Dandy, they're really short on biography, big on
Hmm.
entertainment, big on the numbers, and they kind of create a fairy tale life for the person. In the 50s, with movies like I'll Cry Tomorrow, which deals with alcoholism, suddenly the musical biopic grew up. And
Yeah.
we've been living in sort of that world of the genre ever since. You have to have something going on besides the rise to the top. But it certainly is a formula, and The Coal Miner's Daughter is one of the best because before it really hits the formulaic elements, the first half, which is particularly excellent, really creates a world, that sort of backwoods mining community. And it's almost like a documentary. You feel like they've stumbled on this world that's hidden away from most of us, but this sort of fascinating community and her poor but loving family and her kind of success that she will have seems so impossible from the beginnings in this movie. But the creation of an atmosphere, a real feeling, an authenticity of place is, I think, what sets this one apart. And as she rises again, too, it's such an impossible story that actually happens. We're so completely with it. We know it's going to work out because we that's why we're watching the Loretta Lynn story. But it doesn't really become formulaic until she's a big star, and then of course has to deal with the trauma of celebrity, the endless touring, the loneliness, and then you feel like it gets closer to all the things we expect from this kind of movie. But even with that, it's still, like I said, she's extraordinary. He's matches her every step of the way. So they kind of keep it grounded even when it seems to be about to veer off into those more superficial elements.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, this movie doesn't really become what you would expect out of this genre until about the 45-minute to an hour mark when it really starts being like, okay, she gets her guitar, she starts playing, start getting these.
Right.
That's something that would happen right at the beginning of
Yeah.
if this movie would come out today. I think of something like Walk the Line or something, where it just like it starts with him like he's got to think about his whole life before he goes on stage, and then it flashes back to his rough childhood, and then he just kind of instantly, and it's something that Walk Hard famously very, very accurately skewed. That's a movie I've covered on this show before. I think that all the music biopics have become so just hitting the beats at the exact same moments. Whereas this,
Yeah.
it does still hit some of those beats, but
Yeah.
not in the way that we have come to expect. Like we said, that whole first chunk of the movie, the first act or so, is all about establishing, like you said very well, a place and characters and a really strong relationship between these two characters. You are having this, very young girl basically getting like her dad is very afraid she's going to lose her childhood, and she does. She gets swept up by this older guy and loses all that, and you live with that and you see them and you understand who they are as individuals and who they are as a couple, so that back half of the movie, those second two acts, are so much stronger, and it is
Yeah.
really built on that really good script and these really good performances. That's obviously what you talk about in your book, and I think that, yeah, but what you're saying about Jones being really good in this, he plays a character who is on surface level pretty monstrous. He does some just unforgivable things when you look at it. He marries someone who's a 13-year-old girl. He
Yeah.
beats her. He like assaults her sexually. Like, it's not pretty, but he doesn't play him like a monster. He plays him like a real person. And
Yeah.
that's what I think really gives the performance weight, because he is doing all these terrible things, and you like a lot of times you do not like him. You're like, get out of
Right.
there. But at the same time, you see that he is like a really human person who is just broken, and he like he gets angry, and he actually legitimately seems to care about her, and so it's a nuanced, really good performance. And then it happens to be okay, this is a story about these people, it's a story about these real people and this incredible journey that she went on, this kind of insane rags to riches story, and then
Right.
he gets taken along with all that. So that's why for me, I really don't like this genre, generally speaking. Other than maybe Love and Mercy, this is really the only music biopic that has made such an impact on me.
Yeah, and it's not even a musical, like I said, in those first 45, 50 minutes, it's not a musical at all. It's not till he throws the guitar in her lap and she starts singing to the kids. But what's also interesting, at least the way the movie depicts it, there would be no Loretta Lynn without Do,
Right.
the character, because he's the one who says, you're really good, you got to get out there, you shouldn't wear too much makeup, you should, when we were in the recording studio, you sing to the kids, don't be nervous. So he really is the one with the drive to have the
Mhm.
career, and it's not for selfish gains, it's not like Gypsy, it's not living through somebody else. It's really about, I believe in you, and he's right. She goes to the top, and it only really sours for him when he becomes useless. She's a star. She doesn't need him. Nobody cares what he's going to offer behind the scenes. She doesn't need him. I mean, she needs him emotionally because she doesn't do that well on the road by herself. But it's a really hard transition for him. He starts the drinking, the womanizing, because suddenly this thing that he has created and been so necessary to, he's suddenly totally obsolete, and so he does have a really interesting arc to play. And so it is nuanced, as you said, because he offers so many good things into her life while a steady stream of negative things as well. And they're so tied to each other. And like I said, it, that never really goes away, no matter how bad things get, because the movie pretty much it ends with that sort of comic scene where he buys the plot of land and is talking about what they're going to do and how they're going to build, and they fight over which room is going to face which way. And you think, God, they're still funny together after all these years. They're still bickering like they just met, and they're adorable together. And so through all they've been through, we still see the depth of whatever it is that binds people together so deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up that he was kind of the one who inspired her. He
Yeah.
gets her the guitar. He's like, "You're a great singer." He pushes her to get on stage. He then makes her go to that recording studio and is able to bring out the performance with the kids. So it's, I don't know, that really spoke to me about like how, once again, it's a complex thing that they have. Like, I don't think is a good
Yeah.
dude, but like he's still, even in like, you can have these relationships or these things happen to you that on the surface, like, oh, that was like bad, that was a dark time or whatever, but something really good can come out of it. Something creative
Yeah.
can come out of something you might not expect. And like I said, he's not doing it for selfish reasons. He's not like, oh, like it's not like in Elvis or something. He's not the
Yeah.
colonel or whatever. He's not
Right.
depicted that way, which is, speaking of like a Hanks role, you talked about a Hanks role that was really good. That's one I don't love quite as much as his role as the colonel. That's more of like a cartoon villain, which is
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of what
Yeah.
Tom Lee Jones is doing here.
Right.
And it was interesting because to see him in this younger role, obviously I've seen him in a lot of stuff, but more familiar with his stuff from, I guess, the '90s onward, from like The Fugitive and whatnot. And I know that he'd done some work before this, but and same with Sissy Spacek. I'd seen her stuff a few years before this in Carrie, and I'd seen stuff in her later career, but for whatever reason, I had never watched this movie, and I'm just so glad that I finally got around to checking it out because there is a lot of great stuff in it.
Yeah, and what she accomplishes, as you said, she had already done Carrie. She had already been nominated for an Oscar. She was a real up and comer, one of the sort of new talents of the 70s. But this movie really established her as a major force. And then she would be throughout the 1980s. She was one of the top women in the movie business. But what she accomplished, so many things in this role. She ages from 13 to about 40. She's playing a famous singer, and she does her own singing, beautifully capturing both the sound of Loretta Lynn, the style of Loretta Lynn. So she's completely believable vocally. She's completely believable emotionally, and she literally ages from basically a little girl all the way through. And there isn't one moment in this movie where you think, I don't believe that. You at some point just believe Sissy Spacek is Loretta Lynn. And if you saw the real Loretta Lynn, she wouldn't seem quite as authentic. I'm kidding, of course. But that's how good she is. And it's really, as I say in the book, it's really probably one of the most undeniable choices in the history of the Academy Awards. It's like, what didn't this woman do to achieve this role in every possible aspect? And because of all those things, there's another reason why some person in a movie can be overlooked is when somebody does what she did. And the element of doing her own singing is, I think, what put it over the top in terms of the kind of press she got. Like, wow, look at what she did. And he doesn't, as I said, he doesn't do anything musical, so he's in a different lane in this movie, but so essential and just as believable. Again, you'd never think you're watching actors at some point. They're just from that beginning where the authenticity of place is so well established and they're so comfortable in it, and then with each other that you just, in the best possible way with movies, are lost in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're really hitting on something with her performance where it is a performance that works on every level, you know? When you see her and
Yeah.
she's like 13 and you're like looking at her, you're like, okay, I can tell that's not a 13-year-old girl.
Right.
That's obviously an adult actress, but she plays it so emotionally authentic that you do
Yeah.
kind of forget. You're like, oh yeah, she
Yeah.
does seem like this little girl. And over the course of the movie, even though they're not doing like a lot of age makeup or stuff like
No.
that, you know, you can see her age just in that performance. And you also mentioned how good her singing is, because I didn't even know this until reading your book and doing some other research for this, that Sissy Spacek originally did want to be a singer, and
Yeah.
you know that was her original goal. She got, I guess, dropped by her recording contract and decided to pursue acting instead. So it's like, okay, wow, like there's nobody else. It seems like one of those things where it's like, who else could have possibly played this? Because she does
Right.
such a great job portraying her in those scenes, but she's also a really good singer and really able to capture how this actual person sang and all that stuff. And I always think of, sometimes it's like, with Wicked coming out, it's like, okay, Ariana Grande, really good singer. Is she a great actress? I don't know. But then you have somebody like Cynthia Erivo, they're great at both. So it's
Right.
it's always kind of like you have to kind of find a balance sometimes. Or La La Land, people like to give Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling a little shit because they say, "Oh, well, they're not the best singers." I think they're pretty fine singers, not as
Yeah.
good as Sissy Spacek, but they're incredible actors. So when you can
Yeah.
find someone who does both, you are really firing on all cylinders. And this movie is clearly firing on all cylinders throughout it. That ending, I think, especially because so many of these music biopics have it seems like what would normally be the crest, the second act, where okay, here's like the darkest time, and then
Right.
you kind of have the last act be them kind of like, okay, we're coming back to the family, Ray or like Johnny Cash, whoever, they're kicking drugs and now they're getting back to their family that they've neglected or whatever. That happens in maybe like is that doesn't even really happen. It's maybe kind of implied, and she's not even on drugs or anything, but she's kind of like spiraling. She has
Yeah.
that performance that happens with maybe
Right.
5 minutes left in the movie, and just it's not even a performance. She just goes up and it's just like, I've wasted my life. Like I was a mom at 14 and I've had
Mhm.
no life. I've had no childhood. I just went from living for like my young kids to like now performing for you guys. And there's obviously happy moments in there, like her friendship with Patsy Cline, but that's a really
Yeah.
powerful scene. And then you do
Mhm.
get a little bit of like, okay, there is like this happy ending, but it comes so quick. And I think that later movies would kind of take things from this. I think the part of the reason why biopics have become so formulaic is because they saw what worked in this movie and put it into like this Frankenstein monster of like, we have to hit all these beats at this exact moment. Whereas here, they're kind of coming when it comes naturally for the story.
Yeah. And it's like she goes back home and there he is. And however imperfect their relationship has been, he is still the source of strength and this source of someone who knew her when she was nobody in terms of
Mm-hmm.
her profession. And so it triumphantly, somewhat triumphantly ending with the title song back on stage and him kind of beaming in the background. And again, it's kind of a sweet ending because it's still based on those early scenes of when he would look at her and think, wow, you're really something. And they carry all those things from the beginning all the way through. And that's what I'm saying. It gets on some level deeper and richer, even though, as we've said, the plot elements of the last third or so are more formulaic. But going back to what you said about her being cast, there's that always that miracle of timing. Like if
Mm.
this movie had been made 10 years earlier or 10 years later, it wouldn't have been Sissy Spacek and it wouldn't have been as good. And it happens every once in a while when
Mm.
Gone with the Wind is happening and Vivian Lee shows up, and or Streetcar Named Desire is being cast on Broadway and Marlon Brando's the right age.
Yeah, yeah.
Certain pieces, it's the miracle of timing that they were conceived and the person walked in.
Right.
And it still probably would have been good in most cases, but maybe not a classic, maybe not a milestone in the history of theater or film. And I think Sissy Spacek as Loretta Young was one of those just miracle moments of, as you said, who else would have done it? Other people could have done it, but would they have done it as completely?
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, it is definitely a miracle of timing. This is a movie that was clearly right place, right time. And you see some stuff like that where when there's like remakes or something like that, or I think of stuff that like A Star Is Born, where
Yeah.
it comes out. There's like been what, four versions of that, where you're
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, who was like, it's like, okay, was this performance better than this one, or like James
Right.
Bond or something. Everyone has their own favorite James Bond,
Sure.
and it's kind of like one of those things. It's like, okay, yeah, this was the right character to play at this time. It might not have worked out so well in this other performance, but it really worked out here. And yeah, if this did get, remade or something, I don't think it would be as impactful, because I don't know who
Mm.
you cast that could
Right.
possibly recreate this performance. To go back to what you were saying about it ending with the coal miner's daughter, that's the actual song, which I'm
Yeah.
going to be honest, I was not really that familiar with Loretta Lynn, so I didn't
Yeah.
even realize that was the name of a song, and I should have.
Yeah.
All these music movies are named after a song from their person, so I was like, okay, duh,
Right.
when it happened. But that was a really powerful moment, because it did really tie back into the beginning of the movie, and her being like the coal miner's daughter, like her dad going out and working in these mines, and her being like the oldest of a family of 8, and just having this hard life out there and
Mm-hmm.
out in Kentucky, which I always kept thinking of Justified watching this. If anybody
Mm-hmm.
watches that
Mm-hmm.
show, out in the holler or whatever, and her just kind of coming from these so humble roots and going to where she's at now. But the one thing she always had, even before she had was her dad. Her dad loved
Mm-hmm.
her so much, and he knew that he saw right through what this guy was. For everything else, he looked at it and was
Yeah.
like, he's basically like, you're stealing my daughter away, and he's like, hey, don't hit her and don't take her
Right.
away. He knew right away like what this guy was all about, but he knew, he's like, this is not my choice to make. I love my daughter. And when then he dies in such an impactful scene, and
Mm-hmm.
to have the bookend of the movie be a song about him and that relationship that she had, was so perfect, because it takes something early in her life, and
Yeah.
where she ends the movie in her life. Obviously she lived for many years after this, but like it kind of tied everything all together in a nice little bow, I thought.
Yeah, and speaking of, we're talking about authenticity. Those supporting performances, Levon Helm as her father, you feel like he is that man that they just
Hmm.
found, and Beverly D'Angelo as Patsy Cline. She was already on her way. I mean, she had just been in Hair, but she does her own singing too. Amazingly, Patsy Cline, another voice. Everyone in 1980 was familiar with the sound, and she only has a few scenes. I wrote about her performance in my previous book, There Are No Small Parts, because she's in that movie for about 10 minutes and makes a real impact. And again, how how many seconds before you entirely believe you're watching Patsy Cline, and that friendship being established between the two women, and again, do feeling left out and starting to act out because of it. And so yeah, certainly, like I said, the musical biopic was already a mess of cliches by 1980 through all those movies of the 50s. And yet this really stands out as one of the top, I don't know what number I'd say, maybe top five, but it really does stand out. And it was soon followed by Sweet Dreams with Jessica Lange playing Patsy Cline, which is also a pretty good one. Not quite as good, but pretty good. You know what? I don't know if have you ever seen Love Me or Leave Me from 1955?
I have not checked that one out
I
yet.
would recommend that because it's another, I mean, it's from that heyday of this musical biopic era that were, as I said, a little more down and dirty than
Mm.
the Yankee Doodle type of movie. But it's interesting because it's about Doris Day as Ruth Etting, a popular singer of the 30s. But the focus of the movie really is Jimmy Cagney in a non-musical role in a somewhat similar relationship to what happens in Coal Miner's Daughter, where he is responsible for pushing her, believing in her, and also he's not a nice guy, and
Mm.
he's really out for what he can get from her physically. And so I mean that one breaks the mold in certain ways too, and I think like Coal Miner's Daughter stands out for having a freshness about it by not completely succumbing to what is expected of a musical biopic.
Yeah, yeah, I think that okay, I'll have to add that one to the list. Because I am interested in these kind of when you take a film that or a film genre that you think you know really well and it does something different.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wanted to circle back to talked about all these great supporting performances, and yeah, you mentioned Beverly D'Angelo's only this movie for about 10 minutes, which I'm thinking about. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, but like it feels like she's in the movie for at least half an hour. It's one of
Yeah.
those roles like an Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, where she just has such
Yeah.
an outsized impact, and every
Yeah.
second she's on screen, you can't help but notice her, and she's so good. And then
Yeah.
when she's gone, you really feel her absence because obviously her dad has died, and then
Yeah.
her now I guess mentor dies,
Yeah.
and really all she has left is due. And Patsy Cline is somebody I'm a little more familiar with,
Mhm.
because she was featured prominently. Her music was featured prominently on my favorite TV show, Lost. So I kind of
Mhm.
got knew a little. I've listened to her a little bit since then, so I recognized her stuff a little more. I knew a little bit more about her. But yeah, D'Angelo really brings the heat in this performance, and she wasn't nominated either, was she?
No, she was not. She was
Okay.
not, and she should have been certainly. And it's also is like when she comes into it, she's this blast of positivity, and she believes, and she's not jealous of Loretta and thinking, "Who's this up and comer who's going to steal my spotlight?" It's like she's immediately the big sister who's going to take this naive girl under her wing. And her likability factor is off the charts. I mean, we just love this character of Patsy so much. And we feel through Sissy Spacek how much Loretta loves this woman. And we also get why, Dew is jealous because in a lot of ways, he can't compete with what she's offering. Just the know-how of the business of being famous, of maneuvering the pitfalls of celebrity. And it's right. It's we know Patsy Cline's going to die if we know anything about musical history,
Mhm.
and even though we know it's coming, we've fallen in love with this character, and it's crushing, not just for those in the movie, but for us watching it. And you're right, she makes a huge impact because she's a blast of goodwill and energy, and the absence, the silence is deafening.
So yeah, like major, like just great performances all around. I even noticed I clocked. It was bugging me because I noticed William Sanderson, like towards the beginning of the movie, and I was like, what do I know that guy from? And I was like, oh, I was like, he's in Blade Runner. Okay, but yeah, like a lot of good like character actors and people
Yeah.
you would see pop up and stuff later on. And just to touch back on the meteoric rise that she experienced, and how it really does give you time to sit in the poverty she's at the beginning and the kind of excessive wealth she gets to by the end. I think it's really interesting, and it talks a lot about like your passions and how those can be these great things for you and these escapes, and they can be ways for you to lift yourself up, but they can also be these like traps almost as you see what happens to her. And it reminds me of something like Hoop Dreams almost, where that
Yeah.
movie is all about these two people who have this incredible talent, and everyone around them is trying to utilize that talent to lift themselves up out of this situation they're in and get to like this next stratosphere. Basketball is seen as this great kind
Hmm.
of escape, this way to escape the bad parts of the city or whatever. And this does the same thing, but with music. And much like that movie, these guys love basketball. It's their favorite thing in the world, and they
Yeah.
love playing it. But it kind of becomes this just tool to move up in the same way that she just starts sings because she likes singing. She's just a good singer. She
Yeah.
thinks it's fun, you know. She likes the guitar. She obviously loves what she's doing, but it does really take a toll on her.
Well, she's so unprepared, like I'm sure a
Mm.
lot of people are. If your success happens quickly, how do you have the tools to handle it? And I guess if it takes you 20 years to make it, you're more prepared because you feel like you've earned every day. You learned something every day, and you mentally have arrived at a place where you're ready to accept it. But for this young woman who's got several kids at home, and she's been singing just for her own fun and is nervous about singing in her first bar and doesn't want, she's shy and scared, and then suddenly she's famous when she hits the
Mhm.
Grand Ole Opry. And how does anyone have the tools to just suddenly be famous, suddenly have people clawing at you? And the movie's really good at showing someone who is essentially an innocent in so many ways thrust into the spotlight.
Yeah, 100%. Because yeah, it does such a good job of establishing her character early on, giving you the time to breathe with her, and then because she is like innocent, she's very kind, but she also has this like very fiery side
Yeah.
that often will come out in the scenes with Tommy Lee Jones, and they kind of have that. It's at one moment it could be like playful bickering. She's like, I
Yeah.
love that they have the call back at the end where she's like, "Stop growling." He's like, "Grr," that was such a
Yeah.
good moment of
Yeah.
calling back. But
Yeah.
at other times it can be like intense and violent and scary. Like when he's like starts like attacking her when she's out with Patsy Cline and she swings her purse at him
Yeah.
and gets in the
Yeah.
car. It's a tense moment. Like you
Yeah.
there because you've seen him be violent, so you're just like really worried at certain points in the movie. And but she is also just like she's like, you know what? At first she's very passive and very meek, but she does kind of find her own fire and is able to ha- have her own with him, and just kind of like
Yeah.
hit back just as hard, and I love that for her. And it just in the same way with him, she does that kind of with the world. She's going up against these like crazy obstacles, and people that she's loved have died, and she's got
Yeah.
to like be this person, and she hits back, and I love that in that moment, that scene where she's at her lowest, she looks at her fans and she says, "I know you're here because you love me," and she says it with such authenticity, and the way like all the extras are looking back at her is like you can tell they really do. And I think that it's that parasocial relationship that has become so commonplace, especially today. But I think it's still she's still that's the thing she has going for her is she may have lost these people, but she knows that no matter what, these people care about her music, and her music has legitimately touched people. And
Mhm.
if you look at Loretta Lynn's actual music, her songs were incredibly progressive, very, very, even though she said she wasn't political, they were very powerful and political like anthems at the time without being, Woody Guthrie or something like that. They just were like, okay, this is what I believe. And they were very empowering music for a lot of people, and she made a huge impact. And I'm glad that even today, her music and this movie are still impacting people.
Yeah, I mean the lyrics are so honest.
Mhm.
They're not the most sophisticated, but they're plain. No, they get to it and
Yeah.
get to it in a way that like so much of great art, people go, I get that. She gets me, and
Hmm.
I know that. That's she's talking about my life. And I think that was the in terms of the lyrics and the subject matter of the songs, it was just she really was from that world. She knew it well and was able to express it in a way that just connected, and obviously went beyond just the country music category because she was nationally famous. She wasn't, just this niche figure. But yeah, it's so good at the different relationships. And in terms of with Do, is that for better or worse, and from the beginning, he becomes an anchor for her, and she for him as well. And like I said, that early scene after the dance when he walks her home and they're kind of fighting, and it's a funny scene.
Mhm.
It's very similar to the scene at the end of the movie, like, as I said, when they're planning the new house they're going to build and arguing how the relationship has been tested time and time again over a couple of decades. But at their core, they're still those same people at the dance when he bought her
Mhm.
pie and it was terrible and made fun of her. So that, for better or for worse, they know each other from before all this, and nothing can take that away. And like I said, instead of saying, "Oh, she shouldn't be with him" or whatever, there's something just to be said for the history that they've shared, and that there's still something genuine that has tied them together. And through those two actors, we feel like, yeah, I get it. It's not perfect, but it's real.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's very real. It's very honest because I was kind of expecting, that Hollywood ending, that ending where she gets out from
Yeah.
who is basically her abuser, even though like they had, like you
Right.
said, they had this special relationship. Most movies, you think, okay, like she gets out of this, whatever, she goes and lives the life, but that's it's too real for that. It's too much like that's because
Yeah.
that's not really what happened in real life. Like
Right.
she stayed married to him until he died.
Yeah.
And so and clearly, they had a whatever relationship they had. I'm not here to comment on somebody's actual
Yeah.
relationship in real life.
Sure.
But that I think it comes through that they're giving these authentic performances of these actual characters that have had this time to grow and establish that so many movies would not have spent the time on. And
Yeah.
that's what I think helps separate this movie not only from other movies of its genre, but a lot of just character studies in general.
Yeah. Well, they make you believe the choices that the characters make instead of us judging and saying, "Oh, I can't watch this. She should leave him." You're thinking, "Oh, I see what's happening and I see why they're still together. I see why he's behaving horribly and I don't like him, but I understand the bond and I'm fascinated and I want to understand more of what the kinds of things that keep people together that maybe from the outside we don't think they still should be." And like I said, we're not here to decide who should be together and who shouldn't be, but they make you believe in something that they're still working on, still fighting for. And on some level, they know there's nobody out in the world who can know them in the same way. And it's worth holding on to for better or for worse, as we say.
Yeah, I think we definitely hit on a lot of the things that I want to talk about. Was there any other things you wanted to bring up in the movie before we wrap up?
No, I just like I said, I think in terms of writing about Tommy Lee Jones's performance, how it's hard. Also, in my book, I write about Michael York in Cabaret, and it's the same situation when you're the non-musical component of what is essentially a musical. It's easy to be overlooked because you weren't singing or dancing or both. And so I think he did fall prey to that thing. Oh yeah, he's good, but it's a musical about a singer and he's the guy. And it's a shame because it's in a way it's a real two-hander and he's just as vital to the story, just not on stage. But in every other aspect of it, it's really a movie about a relationship tested and as I keep saying, imperfect because they're all imperfect in life. But this one is actually good at depicting that. And so I really think he was overlooked and it still remains one of the best things he ever did.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all that. Like I said, real two-hander. Like this is definitely I think this movie could really be studied on how to look at a duo of performers
Yeah.
really interacting with it because uh you know like obviously when the academy or whoever like recognizes a performance, it's a singular performance, but
Yeah.
unless it's something like Gravity or something like that, or a movie that's just like a one person thing, which are pretty
Right.
rare. Performances don't happen in a vacuum. You're playing off
Right.
other people. You have these dynamics, and the only or the one of the main reasons that Spacek is so good is because of how good Tommy Lee Jones is and how good
Right.
he's playing off her, and vice versa. He's so good because of her, and
Right.
all of the other performers we've named. But like really, them just bouncing off each other is
Right.
what gives the movie its special sauce, 100%.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. The old chemistry factor. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, one more question for you before I let you go. I know you're a busy guy. What what other is there any other music biopics? I know we've mentioned a couple, but if you had to, recommend one or two to people out there that are looking for something a little more or a little less formulaic, or just something really good, what would you recommend?
Well, since I usually deal mostly with the sort of golden age of Hollywood classic film era, and as I said, prior to the 50s, they were great as musicals and pretty lousy as biographies, including one that won the Best Picture Oscar, The Great Ziegfeld, which you don't really believe anything that they're telling you about Ziegfeld necessarily. You're just waiting for the next production number. But as I said, I would recommend Love Me or Leave Me. Another one from that same year, I'll Cry Tomorrow, Susan Hayward as Lillian Roth, which was probably the gutsiest one of that time because it really is her descent into alcoholism. And for 1955, fairly graphic. And she also, Susan Hayward, did her own singing. Now, it was different because by then nobody remembered what Lillian Roth sounded like. Very few people would have. So it didn't really matter. It wasn't like playing Loretta Lynn.
Mm.
But that's an interesting one too. If you just to see, wow, they went pretty far, and that was a long time ago. So that those two, I think, stand out from that time. But they've never really gone away. Like I said, that was a particular heyday in the 21st century. We've had quite a few, one after the other. So it's something that's always been a part of things, and since the 30s. It just seems to go in waves where there just seems to be a stream of them. And so it's rare where you buy the dramatic aspects as well as you do the musical aspects. And I think that's one of the reasons Coal Miner's Daughter stands out so much is that it's every bit as good, equally good in both ways, and probably even better dramatically because that's the thing running underneath the whole movie. That's the foundation of the movie. And so, yeah, it would probably certainly be in the top 10, perhaps in the top five.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and then I'll also just throw out the one I mentioned earlier, Love and Mercy, which
Yeah.
I love it because it completely breaks the conventions of the music biography, which are so much, including this one, like where you take somebody from being very young, like a young teen, going up through a good chunk of their life until their 40s or even their death. Love and Mercy, I love because it kind of looks at just 2 points in Brian Wilson of the BC or not the BC, the Beach Boys
Yeah.
life, and kind of these two very important points, and actually has Paul Dano and John Cusack playing them at two different points, and that's kind of the opposite of what you were mentioning with the old school musicals. That one's a lot
Yeah.
more plot and a lot less music. I don't think there's really that much music at all in it, but I
Yeah.
would recommend Love and Mercy to anybody out there who's looking to get into these movies, and of course, as well as the ones you mentioned. I'm gonna have to check those out because I have not gotten a chance to check those out yet. But yeah, thank you, John, so much for being on. I want to give you one more shot to mention your book and anything else that you want to let the people know about.
Yeah, the book is not even nominated 40 overlooked co-stars of Oscar-winning performances. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. So it's 39 other examples. We've just talked about one, focused on one, but there's 39 others very similar in that there's somebody just as good as the person who won. And for, a variety of reasons, that person somehow just fell through the cracks that particular year. So I really enjoyed the topic. And this was fun, really delving into one of them in a way I haven't really done on a podcast yet. It's been more general. So this was kind of a fun variation on the theme.
Yeah, no, I was glad to have you, and definitely anybody listening, check the book out. Your agent was kind enough to get me a copy, so I got to take a look at it, and I was like, okay, I could do this one, oh, I could do this one, oh, I could do this one, so I was glad I was able to zero in on and one and really dissect it piece by piece with you.
Yeah.
So this was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no trouble. If anybody out there, thank you guys for listening. if you can follow us on all the social media places, if you'd like to, give us 5 stars on however you're listening here. Really helps the show quite a bit. Or go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. We have a Patreon now, patreon.com/underratedmoviepodcast, where there's a bonus podcast once a month. And so you can check that out. There's one we were recently doing on sports movies. We're going to be doing it on 2D versions of 3D movies coming up here. We're going to start a new season of that. And then you also get episodes a week early and ad-free if you sign up for even just $1 on the Patreon. Glad to have you guys there. And I would love anybody who's listening to also sign up. I also just want to mention to check out on Mondays when this doesn't come out, I do another podcast called The Midnight Film Society, where I talk about upcoming movies or movies that have just released with my buddy Damien, kind of give reviews on that. And then the last podcast that I do, Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Whenever there's a new MCU release, I do an episode of that. Sometimes I'll do bonus episodes for the Patreon for that as well, for MCU adjacent stuff. But yeah, definitely check that stuff all out. And then thanks everyone for listening.